From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to examine how predictive analytics can take fleet safety to new heights. We all know that driver safety is paramount in the trucking industry, but determining the risk profile for each driver is no simple task. The rise of predictive analytics, however, is reducing that guesswork. This form of data analytics is making it increasingly possible for fleets to predict which of their drivers are most likely to be involved in a crash. So how does this work? What can predictive analytics truly reveal about driver safety? And how can fleets use this information to prevent crashes before they happen? We'll set out to answer those questions in this episode. To learn more, I recently spoke with a pair of trucking technology leaders at two industry trade shows. Later in the program, you'll hear from Ashim Bose, Chief Data Scientist at Omnitracs. But we'll begin with my conversation with Hayden Cardiff, founder and CEO of Idelic. Let's play those interviews now. We're here in Atlanta at TMC's annual meeting, and I'm very excited to welcome Hayden Cardiff, founder and CEO of Idelic. Thanks for joining the program.
No, thanks for having me, Seth.
So let's talk about predictive analytics. In trucking, this is first and foremost a way to improve safety by gaining insights into driver performance. So I just want to get this, your thoughts on this directly. How can this form of data analytics really help fleets take a more proactive stance to their safety departments?
Predictive analytics, especially when you start to leverage some of the more modern technologies like machine learning, which is the building blocks of artificial intelligence. I mean, when you start to use those types of technology packages, you really gain such a deeper knowledge and level of insight into the data that you have. And with the ELD mandate now full in effect for everyone across the industry, I mean, we've talked to so many fleets who are just drowning in data.
Right.
Data they quite honestly didn't ask for, they don't know what to do with. And with that in mind, especially now being liable for a lot of that data, the idea of predictive analytics has become more and more interesting, and also such a necessity for them to just fully understand what it is and how to use it and how to leverage it, how to make it work for them instead of against them in court, all those types of fun things. So predictive analytics is key when helping to wrangle all of your data, get it into a single source of truth, but then also be able to not just have data, but really drive insights, because that's really the most important part. So any type of predictive analytics, unless it gives you insights, it's obviously not useful.
Yeah, I mean, this is really how fleet managers are going to be able to sort through this just ocean of data that they have increasingly at their disposal. What do you do with it? How do you really get your arms around it? And, next level forms of data analytics is how the industry can start to address that, right?
Exactly. And I think we saw it first with a lot of the maintenance side. Some of the predicting engine failures, predicting part failures, things like that, and that so I think that the overarching understanding of what it is has started to at least take hold a little bit from that maintenance side. But from a safety perspective, I mean, I think that's where a lot of our customers are seeing just a tremendous amount of value and ROI, because you're spending so much money on accidents and claims and insurance premiums and even driver turnover, right? All of these things that are so detrimental to your bottom line, but also your brand and your ability to go out and get better freight. And so if you can now find ways to leverage the massive amount of data that you have to now, again, just make more impactful decisions, you're going to see huge benefits.
Now let's talk about the kinds of information and trends that a predictive model can reveal. What are the types of things that a predictive model might be able to see that a fleet manager wouldn't be able to see on their own? Just give me some examples.
Yeah. So, being able to now pull in things like not just telematics, not just camera events, but also your accidents, your claims, your injuries, your work comp, your OSHA, your customer complaints, HR incidents. I mean, hours of service, all of the information around your drivers are now fair game. And I think that level of just immense data from all those different angles really gives you, from a fleet perspective, just a 360-degree view of your driver if you're leveraging it correctly. And so what that allows you to now understand and identify is, which drivers are having changes in their patterns, changes in behaviors, right? So you can start to see, I'll give you an example. We had one of our customers who had a driver with 7 years of clean history. And first off, the fact that the driver was with him for 7 years, fantastic, right? And then secondly, like, they knew this guy, John, he's a great driver, but then he showed up on the watch list from Predictive Analytics, right? And so they looked at him like, something must be wrong. And so they started to look through and realize that over the past several weeks, had a small backing accident at the terminal, was late to work a few times, had a couple harsh braking events, and also had an argument with a coworker. So, like, none of those things on their own are incredibly alarming, right? But all together and in such a short order, you started to see a pattern. So that pattern was flagged. And so they brought the driver in, sat him down, again, with a nice system, using and leveraging predictive analytics. You need to get all your data together. And so having all that together, you can now more easily coach your driver. So sat down and said, hey, John, like, this is what we're seeing. Like, are we not treating you right? Is there something going on at home? Like, how can we help, right? Which is a fundamentally different conversation with your driver as opposed to after a large accident, and then it's either last strike or you're out of here, or you're having to fire him. Right? So being able to have that conversation before something happens is really important, and you can now shift your tone. So within that conversation, the safety manager quickly realized that this driver's parents needed to go into an assisted living home. So he was stressed out on the job, didn't have time to take care of it, didn't want to miss pay, so he didn't want to take off. And so what did they do? They gave him 2 days paid, let him go home, take care of his business. He came back and started to drive normally. Now, did that prevent an accident? We'd like to think so. But even if ultimately that driver would have never gotten into an accident, you now have one of the most loyal and faithful and dedicated drivers at your company, at your terminal, because they see that you care, and you were able to get out in front of a particular incident, give them the help that they needed at that time, that they weren't forthright with as far as coming out and saying some of the issues that were going on at home, and so it's a net positive all the way around. So those types of systems are really, really crucial.
Yeah, well, so that really is a great example of what this can show. And you think about how, okay, there's a stressful event in the driver's life that shows up in the performance, that shows up in the predictive data analytics, and you can see what's happening, rather than waiting for an accident to occur. And of course, you're pulling in information from lots of different sources, lots of different software and applications. You mentioned ELDs. Fleets are using TMS, transportation management software, all kinds of on-cab systems, in-cab systems now, onboard cameras. What are some of the systems that you integrate with to kind of pull all this information in to feed into it? Yeah,
no, great question. And so, it takes the flexibility to be able to integrate and pull in data from all of these different sources. And, for us personally, that's one of our that has been from our inception, one of our big focuses is making sure that we build our product in a way that's scalable and can have all those flexible API integrations or other ways to push and pull data back and forth, whether it's FTP or other methods, but making sure that we can now have the ability to tie into all those different systems. So, you mentioned a lot: ELD cameras, HR, the FMCSA portal directly, MVR monitoring, background checks, drug and alcohol programs, even sleep apnea, like wireless sleep apnea machines. So all of those are really critical to getting that full picture of driver behavior and driver data. And then also you have your internal systems as well. And this is something that, when we go in and work with fleets, this is a critical piece, being able to now, within our system, you can actually log and track accidents, claims, injuries, work comp, OSHA. So, driver qualification files. So now, instead of having those in spreadsheets or paper files or access databases internally, so again, having to go to 5 to 10 different places, not even talking about your third-party vendors, just inside your own company, right? So being able to pull all of that together is really critical. So, we've been able to form fantastic partnerships and integrations with a lot of your major vendors throughout the industry and in all of those different buckets. So that's why we enjoy coming to conferences like this, because not only do we get to talk to prospective customers, but also our integration partners alike.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open transport topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with transport topics.
I think Idelic actually has a really interesting origin story, if you will. The product began as safety box that was developed in-house at Pitt, Ohio,
Yeah.
for its major motor carrier. And now, since then, it's been commercialized more broadly through Idelic. Just tell us about that journey. Tell us about the origin of the company, the origin of this idea, this product that's now become Idelic.
Yeah, so we are incredibly proud of our heritage of just being able to, be a product that's built by a trucking company for a trucking company. So, knowing that we've taken a lot of the insights from one of the safest fleets in the country, right? I mean, Pitt, Ohio was, who's now a fantastic customer and partner of ours, was up on stage this last show from the MC&E, winning their 7th President's Award in a row. And so that type of intrinsic knowledge just baked into the product is invaluable. And so, they had, back in 2004, they had a large accident where looking back, they had all of the data necessary to identify or train this driver or even get this driver off the road, but they didn't have a system in place to manage that data and help them, again, take data and make it insights. And so they started to create that product in-house just because they didn't see it out in the marketplace. And so that, to your point, became Safety Box and was a fantastic benefit to them and their fleet and their culture. And, we saw a fantastic opportunity to be able to leverage the insights that they've been able to gain and be able to make a dramatic impact throughout the industry as a whole. And so for us, myself and my other founders, we were all Carnegie Mellon alumni, and so we were able to kind of marry up our trucking backgrounds with technology to instead of just taking technology and trying to go find a problem, we had a problem and we were able to leverage technology to go solve it. And so we just saw such a necessary problem that needed to go be fixed throughout the entire industry, and so that's been fantastic just to see the impact that that we've been able to make.
And apart from driver safety, some fleets are also starting to look at ways to use predictive analytics to look at driver retention.
Absolutely.
And that's of course a huge problem in industry. Driver turnover is a big issue, especially over the road truckload. It's almost mind-boggling how much turnover there is and how fleets can find a way to manage that. But how can predictive analytics help to solve that problem? And what can a predictive model understand about which drivers are most likely to be the next to leave a company?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And predictive analytics, especially when leveraging machine learning, right? And I'll make that distinction clear because machine learning is such an additive layer on top of that, right? You can go in and say, all right, well, if I see a driver who has, less hours this week, let me flag him because he or she might be, more likely to leave. Okay, sure, that's predictive analytics, but there's a much, much deeper level from using and leveraging technology like machine learning, and which is what we do at Idelic. And so that added layer allows you to bring in all of these data sources, all of these data, they're called features, right? These leading indicators to now understand and pattern and kind of look at the patterns that have led to those types of events, whether it be accidents, whether it be driver turnover, across hundreds of thousands of drivers going back several decades. And so you just have a ton of data that you're now combing through to identify all those patterns, and it'll go in and actually weight those leading indicators for you, so you can now get a better sense of why your drivers are either getting ready to have an accident or getting ready to leave, so you can go in and address them in a more prescriptive way. And so you're absolutely right. Machine learning, predictive analytics, those types of tools are critical for identifying not only accidents, but also which drivers are getting ready to leave. You start to look at data like, can be very, understood metrics like home time, pay, things like that. But when you start to also factor in, their safety, factor in their operations, their effectiveness at their job. For us, we're actually in the process of launching a driver mobile application, so where drivers can see not only their safety scores but also see kind of the trainings and start to see leaderboards and see kind of where they stack up and rank against their peers. And so their engagement with those types of mobile applications, their engagement with communication back and forth from dispatch or driver managers or the safety teams, like all of that is incredibly telling information that you can also leverage into those predictive models to, again, I understand who's most at risk to leave.
Sure, and you've throughout this conversation, you've used words like proactive and prescriptive, and I think that's starting to lead into really the future of data analytics. So I want to get your thoughts on where analytics is heading next. Do you see it become increasingly prescriptive, and is it going to incorporate more machine learning capabilities as you've been describing? What will data analytics look like years ahead?
It has to incorporate more prescriptive and actual insight into what should be done, right? And that's the crux of using predictive analytics, right? Like, you want to be able to understand what to do. And so it's helpful to understand what problems are, but if you don't know how to solve those problems, it doesn't do you any good. And so for us, actually, that's our next iteration from a accident prediction standpoint, is not only understanding who's most at risk for an accident over the next 3 months, but also what training should I prescribe based on that driver's past history, based on what training has been proven to be most effective for your fleet, what brands of training, what third-party vendors. So, there's so much into that side that we're really excited about, that we have the data that our data science team is diving into. So, and to your point, that gets to that next layer of insight, which is, hey, I can show who's at risk. Okay, but then why? Okay, that's another layer that we provide, which is fantastic. Now, what's that next layer as well? Is, okay, what do we recommend to do about it based off of that predictive analytics? And so, the whole point of this, and what we keep hearing from customers is, when you're talking about driver managers, when you're talking about dispatchers, a lot of fleets are moving to this trend of putting safety in the hands of operations, which we love, because there's a lot more people in operations than there generally are in safety. So if you can create that culture across the entire organization, you're going to have a stronger safety culture. But when you're talking about driver managers or dispatchers, a lot of times you're talking about 20-something-year-olds, pretty new in the industry, pretty new in their own careers, and they're trying to coach, train, and manage seasoned professional drivers, right? Like, if you don't have your ducks in a row, if you don't have everything really nailed down, if you don't know what you're talking about, it can become very sticky very quickly. And so being able to give them better insights into what to do, what to train, how to say it, how to identify these issues with the drivers and bring those issues up. Within our platform, we also have, performance improvement plans where they can actually have tasks that are assigned to those driver managers and see exactly what talking points they should have, what coaching points they should have, what notes they need to be taking. So, like, really making it dead simple for your frontline managers to be more effective, right? And that results in higher retention. That results in higher safety. And we've had customers drop accident rates by 45 and 50%. We've had turnover get cut by 40%. Those types of things speak for themselves. And so the more and more people in the industry, and speaking, outside of just ourselves, but more and more people in the industry can continue to dive towards the answering of not just what or why, but what to do because of that insight is really important.
Well, it'll be certainly fun to watch all this develop and see more and more sophistication and fleet management using all this information that the industry's capturing. And just a final question I want to leave you on here. We're here at TMC. Just want to get your takeaways from the show. Anything you've seen in the exhibit hall, or maybe conversations you've had. Any takeaways that you've had from this event thus far?
As all ATA events, this one's fantastic, and you get a lot of professionals coming and looking at the technology side, looking at the maintenance side, and really trying to pull that together for their fleet. It's always fun. And so some of the biggest takeaways that we've seen thus far, just walking around, is just the buzz and excitement around what's next, what's new, and then how do you justify that from an ROI perspective. And all the fleets that we talk to, they're really keen and excited on kind of what's next. How do we stay ahead? How do we stay proactive in whatever side of the business we're talking about, whether it's maintenance or whether it's safety? Being able to, how do we stay a leader and how do we stay focused? But it really comes down to, what solutions are going to be there, but what solutions are going to provide the most impact. And so, that's one of the things that we always try to stay keenly aware of is, how are we trying to facilitate that for our customers, and how are we trying to facilitate that for fleets, is make sure that we're providing value across the board.
Well, hey, this has been a great conversation, great dialogue, but I think that's a pretty good place to leave it. So thanks again for joining us, Hayden. We really appreciate you taking a little time out to chat with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Seth.
You bet.
Transport topics in one word: authoritative.
Knowledge.
Outstanding.
Reliable.
We ask Transport Topics readers to describe us in one word.
Informative.
Informative.
Integrity.
The Bible.
Authoritative.
The authority.
Transportation information, that's two, but I gotta have it both.
Physically large. Oh, that's 2 words.
Visit influence.ttnews.com/say hello to find out what they're talking about.
I'm here in Las Vegas at Omnitracs Outlook 2020 User Conference, and I'd like to bring in Ashim Bose, Chief Data Scientist at Omnitracs. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So I'd like to speak with you about the rise of predictive analytics. Now, in trucking, the main uses are to improve driver safety and driver retention, but let's start with safety. How can fleets use this form of data analytics to really take a more proactive stance on driver safety?
Great question, Seth. Safety is one of the key drivers within the industry for a lot of different reasons, including, lives lost in accidents, including, insurance liability, including the health of the drivers, health of the assets, etc. So it's really important to make sure that we are using the latest and greatest techniques from not only analytics, but AI and machine learning as well to improve the safety of our customers. So, I'll give you a few examples of how AI and ML analytics can improve safety. Simple things like velocity, acceleration, some of the driving characteristics, hard braking, lane departures, critical events as they're called, black spots, which are, these congestion areas where events occur. These are all indicators of, potential safety-related issues which can be predicted on, if you will. And so our algorithms, based on the data we collect, are able to diagnose some of these as potential early warning indicators, if you will, that can be then, provided as alerts to customers in the cab, but also aggregated and presented as interesting information to the back office as well. So hopefully that gives you a sense for safety.
Sure. And what can a predictive model see that a fleet manager, a human in the back office, wouldn't be able to see on their own?
Yeah, so the predictive models are not only, looking at historical information, but also looking at real-time information, which is where the AI and ML comes in. And there's, the whole communication loop between the cab and the back office and back to the cab to prevent something from happening, which is the predictive part, is a fairly complex loop. So, these algorithms can work in real time to do this, whereas people in the back office would find that challenging, and they'll be swamped with the different types of data they would have to look at to do that.
No doubt. And can you tell us a little bit more about the types of data sets that your analytics software is looking at? Just give us some examples of where you might be able to pull in some of this information that to ingest and start to see some of those trends.
Yeah. So, I'll give you some examples. Some of this is our secret sauce. I'm not going to talk too much about
Fair
it.
enough.
But, I mentioned speed is one. There are, speed limits, and how much a driver is over a speed limit is interesting information. The driving distance or the following distance, behind a vehicle is another interesting piece of information. Road geometry plays a role as well. If you have sharp turns and speed limits, then that could be an indicator of, safe driving. So these are some examples. There is map information, there is, bridges and heights and that type of stuff. The classic example is, trucks getting stuck on the bridges and so on and so forth. So, this is all basically data, and the fact that we can harness that data and provide real-time alerts and, preventive information so that customers don't get into the trap of falling into some of these issues is extremely important.
Sure. And you've been mentioning artificial intelligence, machine learning. Maybe explain a little bit more how that's shaping the further development of data analytics.
Great question. So, analytics has been around a while, as has AI and ML, but let's talk about analytics. It's a primarily statistical-based approach, and it's primarily looking at historical data sets and then deriving trends, outcomes, patterns, etc., based on that. So in a way, you are basically looking in the rearview mirror and trying to figure out what the future looks like. And when you then have something to look ahead with, then it made a lot of sense. But now with AI and ML, we are able to basically apply some of this intelligence, still learn from the past, but apply it based on current data, current scenarios, and even forecasted scenarios in the future, and do the analysis and the output of the insights and intelligence in a much faster way. So basically, with the advances in hardware and software, compute and storage, etc., some of these algorithms that would, in the past require, roomfuls of equipment can now be done in very small chips. And so, it's become much more realistic to embed the AI and ML into, real world operational day-to-day workflows.
Okay. Let's talk about one of the other main applications for predictive analytics in our industry, and that's driver retention. So we all know that driver turnover is just a huge issue in our industry. It's a challenge, and it's a big cost for trucking companies to onboard new drivers constantly. So just tell us a little bit more about how predictive analytics can help the industry begin to solve part of that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Attrition is a big problem within the trucking industry. Retaining good drivers is extremely important to our customers. And so here we have a lot of different indicators we use, all the way from, metrics such as, time on the job, distance away from home, even some of the mood-related factors of how, psychology-related factors about how the driver is feeling, the tone of their conversations with their supervisors, what they're talking about. A lot of these become input to our models, if you will. And what we found is, with the right text analytics, sentiment analysis, looking at some of the other productivity data, time away from home data, hours of service data, etc., we're able to diagnose where there may be challenges ahead in terms of attrition. And this allows our customers to focus on the at-risk drivers for attrition who are strong performers. Mm-hmm. There's a certain element of the driver community that they may not, necessarily be too worried about losing if they're low performers. Right. But this allows them to focus on, the high performers, the ones they want to retain, and develop strategies to retain them.
Right. So we talked about driver safety. We talked about driver retention. What are some other uses for predictive analytics in our industry?
So we're seeing, a lot of use cases now to help improve productivity. And this is a good example of the blend of analytics and AI and ML coming in. So, for instance, optimizing routes, ensuring, kind of looking at wait times, dwell times, and planning the routes more accurately, giving customers intelligence on when to take toll roads, when not to. These are some examples that are fairly strong, have a strong indication and correlation with productivity. Mm-hmm. And, we're also doing things like helping customers resolve distance anomalies with their routes when the GPS data is missing or noisy, and help them figure out what were the routes taken, what were the taxes owed on fuel and stuff like that. So these are pretty mundane workflows, except for those who are doing them.
Yes, right.
But with analytics and AI ML, we're basically helping them do their jobs much more efficiently and productively as well.
Understood. The first time I remember predictive analytics really becoming part of the conversation in our industry was from a company called Fleet Risk Advisors, and that's a company that Omnitracs acquired back in 2011, back when Omnitracs was still part of Qualcomm. Of course, a lot's changed in the industry since then, and I'm sure a lot's changed with data analytics. So I just want to get your sense on just how much data analytics has improved since those days, almost a decade ago when maybe we first started to have this conversation.
Yeah, very familiar with Fleet Risk Advisors. Some of those team members are still on my team.
Sure.
And there's a lot to be proud of there in terms of the legacy, some of the models that were built, which at the time were definitely very forward-looking. What I would say is the field continues to evolve, and as I was mentioning in the past, it was more around statistical analysis, and it was based on looking at historical data. One of the biggest changes going forward is, with the introduction of AI and ML technologies, with cloud computing coming in, we are able to do this at a much faster pace with smaller data sets and with real-time algorithms. Even to a point where we're looking at basically, doing all of it in real time, where data comes in and the insights come out in real time, which, if you look at the past, was not the case. It was more of a batch process where you collected the data, you exported it from one system, you imported it into another, you ran your statistical packages, and then you sent out the reports and the insights maybe a week later, maybe a month later. And moving from that to a much more dynamic, real-time based approach, leveraging new AI and ML algorithms, which are now available in many of these open source and cloud packages, also allows us to develop and enhance these models and automate a lot of the front and back end, if you will, so that it becomes more efficient as well.
Yeah. I want to ask you just a little bit more about the future of data analytics. You've described where we've come over the last 10 years and maybe where we're headed, but do you see us moving from a predictive approach to increasingly a prescriptive approach to analytics, where we're not only predicting where maybe the next event might happen or the next driver who might leave your company, but also to prescribe a solution to the fleet manager to kind of not just diagnose, but also come up with a potential solution to that problem?
Absolutely. So I definitely see prescriptive in the very near future. In fact, even with some of the predictive models we have, we're also doing some prescription. What I would say is there's a need for a human in the loop, in the sense that, somebody needs to look at the prescriptions, make sure that, they are aligned to what companies' policies, procedures, best practices might be. But having said that, some of the initial set of prescriptions can be automated using AI and ML. And, I definitely see that it's already being rolled out, I would say.
Great. Well, this has been a great conversation, but I think that's a pretty good stopping point there. So just want to tell you thanks again for joining us, Ashim. It's been a pleasure and great to get some of your insights.
Thank you. It's a pleasure as well.
From time to time, an issue commands so much of the industry's attention that it requires a deeper dive. A resource readers can turn to. A Transport Topics special report. In 2019, we produced two. One on the rising tide of electric trucks that are promising to reshape how goods are moved down the road. We also examined trends in trucking and insurance, with particular focus on how new technologies help motor carriers eliminate risk and how this is influencing insurers' underwriting practices. I'm Joe Howard, Executive Editor here at Transport Topics, and I invite you to learn more about our special reports and reserve your copy of the next one at ttn.ws/special.
Before we close, let's take a moment to revisit our original questions. What can predictive analytics reveal about driver safety? And how can fleets use this information to prevent crashes? As we've heard from our guests, predictive analytics can give motor carriers a clearer understanding of the risk profile for each of their drivers. By aggregating and analyzing data from a wide range of sources, these applications can detect patterns that otherwise would have gone unnoticed. And those patterns can reveal not only safety risk, but also which of the drivers are most likely to leave the company. Armed with that information, fleet managers can schedule additional training and remediation for the drivers who need it the most. And that, in turn, can help trucking companies improve their businesses while making our highways safer for everyone. If you've enjoyed this episode of Road Signs, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with me and the Road Signs team. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. We'll read them and respond daily. And of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with a fresh episode of Road Signs. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.